In this episode, we're talking to Chris Wark, who's a cancer survivor and author of the brand new best-selling book, Chris Beat Cancer. And he's going to be telling us all about his best tips for prevention and treatment of cancer. Enjoy. This is Ari Whitten with the Energy Blueprint podcast, and welcome back. Today, I have with me Chris Wark, who is an author, speaker, and health coach. He was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer in 2003 at 26 years old. He had surgery, but instead of chemotherapy, he used nutrition and natural therapies to heal himself. Chris has made appearances on radio and television and was featured in the award-winning documentary, The C Word. He inspires countless people to take control of their health and reverse disease with a radical transformation of diet and lifestyle. And he is the new author of the book, Chris Beat Cancer, a comprehensive plan for healing naturally. So also, I want to mention that I've promoted his program, it's called Square One, a couple times before, and I'm a big fan of his work. So with that said, Chris, welcome to the show.
Ari, what's up, man? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to have you here finally.
Yeah, dude. Good. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, definitely. So I would love to get started by digging more into your story. So you were diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer at age 26. This was all the way back in 2003. So take our listeners through that. What was that like being, kind of receiving that diagnosis of cancer at such a young age in your mid-20s, and then what was that whole process like as far as the decision making and the emotional state and all of that?
So, man, when I was 26 years old, I was having abdominal pain, and I thought I had an ulcer, and I ignored it for the better part of the year because I just thought, I don't know, maybe it'll go away or whatever. And unfortunately, the pain just got worse and worse. So my wife talked me into going to see the doctor, and they kind of referred me around to a few different doctors, and they prescribed me some medicine for ulcers. Didn't help. And then eventually the pain just got so bad that I was balled up on the couch every night after dinner. I was just like, man, something is wrong. So I went to a gastroenterologist. He did a colonoscopy. And when I woke up after that procedure, my wife and I are in this little room or whatever. And he comes in, he said, look, you've got a golf ball sized tumor in your colon.
Wow.
And, I was still on some pretty heavy medication, propofol or whatever they used to put you out. And I just was like, what? This doesn't even make sense. What are we talking about right now? So he said, look, you've got this tumor and you might be cancerous. We took a biopsy. We were going to send it to the lab and see if it's cancer or not. So a day or so later, I got a call and they said, listen, it is in fact colon cancer. We need to get you into surgery right away and get this thing out of you before it spreads and kills you. And at that time in my life, I was, again, 26, pretty young. I'd been married less than 2 years. I was in real estate, building a real estate business. And I had never had any friends or family members go through cancer. So I'd never really seen it up close and personal. And like most cancer patients, I was pretty clueless about treatment, about the disease, about the industry. I didn't know anything. And so, when they said, you got to have surgery and we got to take this thing out of you right away, I was like, okay, right? If you say so. Cancer seems pretty scary, so I guess I should do this. And this was just a couple days before Christmas. And so I was like, man, is there any way we can postpone the surgery till after Christmas? I'm already kind of depressed enough and I'd rather not be in the hospital on Christmas. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. So I went in on December 30th and they took out a third of my large intestine. It was supposed to be laparoscopic. But when he put the scope in and started looking around, the surgeon was like, uh-oh, this doesn't look good. And he could see that the cancer had spread to my lymph nodes, and there's a lot of inflammation around the tumor site and stuff. So he opted to just cut me open, old school, took out a third of my colon, ascending colon, which is on the right side of your body, took out my my appendix while he was in there, took out the tumor and a bunch of lymph nodes in an attempt to get clear margins, right? So I woke up and they said, well, we've got more bad news for you. We're hoping it was going to be stage 2, but it's stage 3C. And because it's stage 3, it's metastasized to your lymph nodes. It's spreading. You're going to need 9 to 12 months of chemotherapy in order to prevent a recurrence. And so I'm like, oh, like I hadn't even thought about chemo. Like we'd never even talked about it because they thought I could do the surgery and just go back to my normal life. So now I'm, on some heavy drugs, laying in the hospital, trying to recover from the surgery. And I'm just like thinking about my life and what's going to happen to me.
Yeah. Wow.
And I initially had accepted the fact that I was going to be just a typical cancer patient, right? Just a chemo patient, and I can lose my hair and I don't know what.
And at this time, you weren't particularly health conscious. This health consciousness was not on your radar, that you were not, like me, kind of like a health geek from the time you were 12 years old.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. I'd gone through phases in my life where I had, gone to the gym, and I grew up playing sports and things like that. But at that time in my life, I was eating just the very, very Western diet. I was eating tons of meat and dairy, tons of processed food, junk food, fast food, anything I wanted, because I've always been thin. So like I was a junk food connoisseur, man. And tons of barbecue, because I live in Memphis. It's like the barbecue capital of the world. So yeah, I was not taking care of myself at all. And I had a lot of stress in my life. I was like, trying to build this business as an entrepreneur, and real estate is really tough, and you deal with a lot of, difficult people, from contractors to tenants and whatever. And so, yeah, I just had all kinds of things in my life that were contributing to my disease, which I'll talk about in a minute. But so 2 things happened in the hospital that started me thinking differently. And I did have a background. Like I worked at Wild Oats when I was in college. So like I knew about health food, right? Like I knew what it was. I was very aware that there was health food and junk food. Like I knew that.
There was such a thing as you were shoving McDonald's in your face.
Yeah. I was aware, right? I was aware. And the thing about the health food industry in general, and the natural living and health industry, is a lot of people that are drawn to it because they have disease, right? Because they're trying to heal. And I'd never had any problems. So I wasn't drawn to it. My mom's another story, which I'll tell in a minute. But so these 2 things happened in the hospital. The first thing that happened was the very first meal that they served me after taking out 1/3 of my large intestine. Do you know what it was?
I'm guessing some terrible hospital food.
It was terrible hospital food. Yes. It was a sloppy Joe.
Oh, geez.
It was a sloppy Joe, which, the sloppy Joe is a really kind of interesting food item in and of itself, because they don't serve sloppy Joes in restaurants, right? Because nobody likes them. The only place you can get a sloppy Joe is summer camp, maybe if you're in the army or prison, and apparently at the hospital if you have cancer. Like
I'm just curious. I'm wondering if, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm wondering if sloppy Joes is an American thing only. It probably is. And so maybe to all my non-American listeners, maybe you just want to explain what that is.
Sloppy Joe. Yeah. It's basically ground beef, some kind of ground up mystery meat, ground beef, that they stew in sort of like a tomato sauce, right? And then they get a burger bun and they just kind of slop it on there.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like a burger not formed into a patty with certain kinds of seasoning, and it's like falling all over the place out of the bun. So hence the sloppiness.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like meatloaf, but it's almost just like a soup they just ladle onto your burger. Almost if you ladled chili onto a burger bun. It's kind of like that.
Yeah, that's a good way of explaining it.
So anyway, red meat is a group 2 carcinogen, specifically known to cause colon cancer. right? And they're like, here you go, buddy. Here you go, colon cancer patient. We just cut out a third of your large intestine. Enjoy this sloppy Joe. So that was so strange to me. And I was just looking at it going, well, I don't understand. Like, I didn't know that it caused cancer, but I just knew it was like such terrible food and I didn't want to eat it, but I was really hungry. So I did. Then the second thing that happened in the hospital was the day they told me I could go home, the surgeon came in to check on me and we were having a conversation and I said, is there any food I need to avoid? Because instinctively, like I wanted to take care of myself. Like I already had a mindset that I want to help myself get well, right? I don't want to screw up the surgery or the stitches, eat the wrong thing. Like, are there rules? Like, I've never had my guts cut out and sewn back together. So I'm like, yeah, is there any food I need to eat or avoid? And he says, no, just don't lift anything heavier than a beer.
That's great.
Yeah.
Don't lift anything heavier than a beer or candy bar.
Right. Yeah. So I'm like, okay. All right. And that was it. I mean, that's all the nutritional advice I got from my surgeon. So I'm thinking, the wheels are turning, right? I'm thinking, why is there such a disconnect between health and healthcare? Like nobody seems to care like about healthy eating. It was weird to me. So I go home, I'm recovering from surgery. I'm trying to get off pain medication because I just didn't like feeling doped up. And just after a few days of being home, I was just really thinking a lot about my life and my future and, how many birthdays I had left and what going through chemotherapy was going to be like, what it was going to do to me. And I just started to develop this increasing resistance to chemotherapy. I mean, to the idea that I needed to poison my way back to health. Like that didn't make sense to me. Like, we're going to give you this stuff. It's going to make you really sick. Right. But it's supposed to help cure your cancer. And like I said before, I'd never had anybody go through this in my life. So I really didn't know. I just was operating on instincts. And my wife and I are Christians, and I was just like, I don't know what to do. And so we prayed about it. And I just said, God, if there's another way besides chemo, just show me. Because I don't know what to do. This doesn't feel right. Feels wrong for me. It's not that it's wrong for everybody, but it felt wrong for me. Like deep down, something was saying like, don't do this. And I felt like really it was going to just it would destroy me. I was very physically vulnerable at that time. I was skinny, underweight already. I'd lost a ton of weight over the previous year from not eating, because when you have a digestive disease, like you don't want to eat because it causes pain. So I'd eaten a lot less, lost a lot of weight. Then I had the surgery, lost more weight because I didn't eat for days. And I just felt like, I don't know if I'll even survive that. 2 days after I prayed about it, I got a book that was sent to me from a man in Alaska who knew my dad. And this guy was a business client of my dad's. I'm in Tennessee. And so this book shows up on my doorstep, I open the package, and I start reading this book. And the guy who wrote it had discovered he had colon cancer back in the 1970s. And he had watched his mother suffer and die through cancer treatment and other church members and things. And he just was like, well, I'm not doing that. And he happened to have a friend who was like a health nut who told him, man, you just need to go back to the Garden of Eden and eat raw fruits and vegetables only. And you should probably start juicing carrots too. You need to drink a lot of carrot juice. So this guy does this, and a year later, his tumor is gone. His body healed, right? It wasn't like a miracle cure. It just, his body healed, right? Whatever he was doing that contributed to his disease, or if it might have been multiple things, he stopped doing. And he started doing things that contributed to health. And I'm reading this guy's story and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, this is exactly what I need to do. I asked for something, this showed up, this is what I'm doing. Like, no doubt whatsoever, right? And it was, again, I didn't have a bunch of studies or science or proof or anything. I had one guy's testimonial, one guy's story, And he was still alive, 30 years later or whatever. And I just knew, right? I knew this was it. I called my wife and I was really excited about it. I was trying to explain, like, I got this book and like this guy's talking about like a raw food diet. I'd never heard of it. I mean, nobody was talking about raw foods in 2004, right? There was no YouTube. Like there was no Instagram, Facebook. Raw food wasn't like hot, sexy singles, It wasn't like the supermodel diet or whatever. And so it was just a diet for fringy kind of hippie-ish weirdos. And, but anyway, I'm trying to explain that to her. I'm like, we got to get a juicer and all. And like, she's at work, we're on the phone and she's like, what are you talking about? Like, you're still doing chemo. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. I feel like, I don't know. I don't want to do it. And so we get off the phone. It didn't really end. The conversation didn't go very well. I get off the phone and then, almost immediately other family members are calling me saying, we heard you're thinking about not doing chemotherapy.
Oh, geez.
This is really serious. You need to do exactly what the doctor says. Don't you think if there was something better, they'd know about it? And, I knew somebody that tried alternative therapies and they died. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? I went from like all this like excitement and elation and like answered prayer kind of bliss, like, and excited about radically changing my life and embarking on this healing journey, to everybody around me saying, no, it's a mistake. Don't do that. Like that's wrong. And so like, you can imagine just like the swirling emotions of like fear and doubt and anxiety and stress, like all of that. And I'm trying to figure out like, what do I do? Like, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah. It's almost, it's like if you're alone and you're just, let's say a 26-year-old guy and you're single and you don't even really have that close of relationship to your family, or they don't really have such strong opinions on this. It's almost easier to make the kind of decision that you were trying to make. And now you have all these people like thinking you're crazy and stressing you out and trying to talk you out of it. And then, now they're adding this other layer of psychological stress, which I would imagine is pretty intense psychological stress when your life is at stake.
Super intense.
Yeah. To that.
Super intense. But I had a couple things going for me. One, I'm an only child. And I'm pretty stubborn. And so despite all of that, I just knew like, this is what I got to do. Like, I have to do this and I have to survive. And, there was sort of a deep revelatory epiphany that I had. And the big revelation was the way you're living is killing you. Right. And if that's true, then you need to change your whole life. This is the same thing I tell every cancer patient, right? Not to blame or shame anybody, but it's like, look, this is a wake-up call here. I know so much more about cancer now than I did back then, but if I contributed to this disease in some way, and by the way, the first book I read was making the case that the reason we have, cancer is such a big problem is because of our diet. Like so much of it's driven by diet and lifestyle. And eating way too much meat and dairy, fast food, processed food, junk food. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. And so, it's the first I'd ever heard anyone talk about that. Like that a lot of cancers are caused by our diet. In fact, this is crazy. The number 2 cause of cancer is obesity. It's the number 2 cause. Number 1 cause, most people can guess, it's smoking. Number 2 is obesity, and obesity accounts for over 600,000 diagnoses of cancer every year.
Wow.
40% of all cancers are caused by obesity. It's like, what? Like no one's talking about this. But this isn't just Chris's weird statistical, analysis. This is like National Cancer Institute, American Cancer Society. Like look at any of the major governing bodies of cancer research. They agree. And so that's kind of a mind blower, right? Now I wasn't obese. Okay. So skinny people can get cancer too, but it's a testament to the fact that our diet, which is contributing to obesity, right, is the leading cause of cancer aside from cigarettes. So I realized I've got to change my whole life. And I love the holistic approach to wellness, which was, in a nutshell, enabling your body to heal, right? Instead of treating a symptom, right? Or targeting a symptom or targeting a disease, right? You are trying to restore health, rebuild your body, and create an environment where cancer cannot thrive, right? Because if you have cancer, the tumor is not the problem. It's a problem, right? But it's not the problem. It's a symptom of a systemic metabolic disease, head to toe disease. And it essentially means your body is hospitable to cancer, your immune system is overloaded or suppressed, and you have multiple, we'll just say system-wide dysfunction. So those are big ideas, right? But when you look at cancer that way, you realize, man, cutting it out, poisoning it, radiating it, that doesn't solve the body problem, right? That doesn't fix my terrain where cancer is thriving.
Yeah. I'll mention a quick story, personal story in my family that is relevant to this, highly relevant. And I didn't grow up in a family that was mainstream in their thinking, and that, like, if I was you at 26 and I had the same diagnosis and I said, I don't want to do chemo, I want to treat this naturally, my family, my parents would have had no problem with it whatsoever. And the reason why is that my grandma, my dad's mom, actually was diagnosed. I'm actually forgetting what specific type of cancer it was. I was very young at the time. I was maybe not even born yet, actually, when this was happening, or maybe just a few years old. But she was diagnosed with a very severe, I think it was stage 4 of some kind of cancer. I don't want to, I'm forgetting what specific kind, but she was given about 6 to 8 weeks to live. And she decided that she wasn't really given any option. She was just told, you have probably 6 to 8 weeks to live. And she decided to go down to Mexico, to the Gerson Clinic, and do an alternative approach to cancer. Which at that time, this was back in the early 90s or maybe the late 80s. And that at that time, it was not common or popular at all like it is today. It was a pretty wacky idea. Everybody thought she was crazy for doing that. And she lived another 6 years after that, and then actually died from something totally unrelated. She died from getting bitten by a brown recluse spider. But she lived 6 years after being given that diagnosis of living 6 to 8 weeks. And she was all about green juices and coffee enemas and, the whole Gerson protocol. I think they also do liver or something, like raw liver that they
used to.
They used to.
Raw liver juice, yeah.
Yeah. But so, I grew up in an environment that was very friendly to those sorts of things, because we all saw what it did for my grandma.
That's amazing. And I hear stories like that all the time, which I just are so great. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing that anybody even found out about those clinics back then, because it was all word of mouth. Right. Now you can find them online, but back then, literally, somebody had to tell you about it, basically, So get this, my mom had always been into health. And even though we're in Memphis, Tennessee, it's not a healthy place, right? It's not like California. And she'd always been into health and, loved to go to the health food store and buy some little supplement she read about in Prevention Magazine, or, our pantry always had the, peanut butter you had to stir up, right? And we always had sprouts in the fridge and kefir and stuff like that. So my mom was not near the level of today's hardcore, crunchy mamas, but she was healthier than the average mom. And she would buy whole grain bread instead of white bread. She wouldn't let me buy Lucky Charms. It was I don't know, whatever, granola or something. Mm-hmm. So, but my first birthday was at a McDonald's. So just so we understand, I ate lots of fast food and junk food growing up too. But my mom had amassed this library of books on nutrition, on alternative cancer therapies, raw food. Like, she had all these books about it, and she had read them all. She was just like an avid, lifelong learner. Just loved to learn, loved to read, loved to research, loved information on health and healing, natural therapies, stuff like that. And so when I told her what I wanted to do, she was all for it. So she was the only person in the beginning that really supported me. Now, my dad supported me, but he was just kind of didn't oppose me, wasn't enthusiastic either way. Yeah, he just was there. Just whatever you decide, I'll support. Right. My wife's side of the family was a little bit more, they loved me. They wanted me to survive, but they didn't understand. And they were much more conventionally minded. Right. So they were really pushing me to do that. But having said all that, like I said earlier, I was stubborn. So I was like, I don't care. I'm doing this. I went out and bought a juicer immediately, loaded up fruits and vegetables, like bought a bunch of carrots. I went to Whole Foods and it was like, oh man, they sell like 25-pound bags of juicing carrots. Like, oh, okay. Like, this is a thing, like this is for people who are serious about juicing, I guess. And that's me now. So so for me, I didn't spend really any time researching beyond this first book. Like, it was like, I got a book, learned something, I'm doing it. Like, it's like, take action, we'll figure it out as we go. Like, there's no time to waste. So converted to a raw food diet overnight, just raw fruits and vegetables and juicing. And then kept reading and researching, and learning about other books and like trying to figure out like, okay, what else can I do? What else can I do? But also in order to appease, family pressure, I reluctantly agreed to go see the oncologist, because people are saying like, we just go hear what he has to say. And maybe there's some alternative therapies available. I mean, you just never know unless you go see. And I'm like, okay, all right. So we go to the clinic, the parking lot's full, the waiting room's packed. I walk in there and I'm looking around, and, it's weird because you're like, okay, I'm a cancer patient. I have cancer. I'm like in the cancer club now. Mm. Who else is in the club? Right. Like the first day at school, like who else is in my class? And you're looking around and I'm looking around, everybody has gray hair. Mm-hmm. I'm 26, handlebar mustache, long shaggy hair. Like I was a musician too. I was playing in rock bands and like, I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, I don't belong here. Everyone here is twice my age, or several of these people are 3 times my age. And we sit down on the couch. So we check in, we're watching the TV, like, how waiting rooms are. You're in there for like an hour, no matter what. And out comes Jack LaLanne on the TV on one of the morning shows. And he starts going off. And the guy's like 78, 80, somewhere around there. And he just starts going off about nutrition. He's like, look, the reason we're all so sick is because we're eating all this man-made food and processed food and junk food. If man made it, don't eat it. And I'm like, whoa, like what is happening? I can't believe this is on right now in the cancer clinic on the TV. And I turned to my wife and I was like, she was like, that's pretty weird. And so we go back to see the oncologist. And he gives me the boilerplate pitch, right? He's like, got my file open. And he's like, look, you're 26 years old. You have stage 3C colon cancer. It's very aggressive in young adults. You're going to need chemotherapy, 5-FU plus leucovorin. And you've got about a 60% chance of living 5 years with treatment. Now, I didn't know anything back then. And had I known things, I would have asked a lot more questions. By the way, there's a free guide on my website now. It's called 20 Questions for Your Oncologist that I created that like is something I wished existed when I was going through this. But anyway, so he's basically just telling me how it's going to be. But I asked a couple questions and that really shifted the tone of the conversation and it ended up going in a direction that I did not expect at all. So the first thing I said was, what about the raw food diet? Because I'd been on it for 1 week. And he said, no, you can't do that. It'll fight the chemo. I didn't ask him why. I learned later that they were afraid that raw food is dangerous when you're taking chemotherapy, because chemotherapy decimates your immune system, right? So you become very vulnerable to otherwise harmless bacteria on an apple, right?
But was the concern that a concern of microorganisms or a concern of the phytonutrient content?
Maybe a little bit of both.
Okay.
But the neutropenic diet is sort of an old concept that originated around cancer therapy, where they think patients need to only eat cooked food.
I see.
Microorganisms,
Uh-huh.
which has since been proven to not be an issue.
Yep.
But he said it'll fight the chemo. And the other thing about raw food and chemotherapy is a raw food diet is a very aggressive detoxification diet. So when they give chemotherapy to a patient eating raw foods, your body is so in tune with like whole foods, right? When you put something foreign in there, it's like, whoa, like, what is this? Like, get it out. So it detoxifies a lot faster. And the chemo is typically less damaging. It doesn't do as much harm as they want it to do. So that's
harm to the cancer cells.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing he said, and now he didn't explain any of that. I'll learn that later. The other thing he said to me that I thought was really weird, that really changed the conversation actually, is I said, well, are there any alternative therapies available? And he said, no, there are none. If you don't do chemotherapy, you're insane. And from there, the conversation just turned into him just like berating me with reasons I had to do chemo. And the main one was basically, if you don't do it, you're going to die. Right. And I went into this sort of deer in the headlights state, right? Because stress and anxiety affect your brain function. Like everything just kind of goes haywire when fear and stress take over. And he's talking down to me. He's telling me all these reasons I got to do chemo and, and I wasn't even really hearing what he was saying. I just wanted to run out of there really. But one thing he said that jumped out was, he said, look, I'm not telling you this because I need your business. Which was like, wait, what? Like, I was in sales and they taught me a technique in sales called the push away. And this guy just did the push away on me. And I'm like, wait, what? And like, what does business have to do with it? Like, I didn't even think about business. I thought this was like healthcare. Like, I wasn't thinking about it like a business.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like, yeah, I didn't even realize it was a business. I thought you were just genuinely trying to look after me in the best way that, what you think is in my best interest. But now that you're talking about business makes me think that maybe business is a big part of this conversation.
It's a huge part. And most of us, view the medical industry as this sort of altruistic, a profession of like selfless angels or whatever. Right. And there's a lot of wonderful people in there, but it's such a screwed up industry that it's a screwed up industry that screws up people in it. Right. And it turns enthusiastic, well-meaning med students who want to help make a difference in the world into sort of like, like the old Star Trek thing where like you will be assimilated, right, the Klingons or whatever. Like it just turns them into, or the Borg. Was it the Borg?
I actually was never into Star Trek, so you could say anything right now. I just nod my head.
Yeah. But the point is, it was like, yeah, everyone is conformed. It's like going to the military. Like you have to conform and become this thing that we make you into, right? And they jam people in, medical students and doctors like into this box of conformity. And so I'm getting off track a little bit, but the interesting and kind of crazy thing is that the medical profession has the highest rate of suicide of any profession because it's so just mentally, emotionally, and physically difficult to be a doctor.
Yeah.
And because of the system, right? Because of this money-driven machinery system, like institutionalized medicine system. So my appointment with the oncologist concluded, and I got up and walked straight out of that office into the lobby to the desk like a robot. and made an appointment to get a port put in to start chemo in a few weeks. Like I had just been programmed, like manipulated with fear. And my wife and I walked out to her car and sat in her car and just held hands and cried. And I choked out a prayer, and it was just, my faith was shattered. My confidence was gone. Like I was just terrified. And the reality is that cancer clinics, many of them are really fear factories. There's so much fear in there, and they use fear to manipulate people to say yes to treatment. And cancer patients, more often than not, are making fear-based decisions, not fact-based decisions, and definitely not faith-based decisions. They're just making a decision out of fear, which is, I just don't want to die. I'll do whatever you say. And I have sort of a two-part mission, and one of them is to help educate patients, and so they understand the risks and benefits of treatment before they say yes. That's what that 20 questions guide's all about. Like, ask the right questions so you understand what you're getting into, so you can make an informed decision, so you can make the best decision for you. I don't tell people don't do chemo or don't do treatment. Like, I don't tell people those things, but I do talk about, with a great deal of scrutiny and criticism, the perils and pitfalls of conventional cancer treatment. So anyway, I went home, and I was fortunate. I just thank God that I had several weeks before I was supposed to start chemo, because a lot of patients, man, they get them in chemo the next day. Like a lot of cancer patients, they are diagnosed, they have got them in chemo within a day or two, right? Because they've kind of flip-flopped. Now they like to do chemo before surgery. And so like, well, we need to do chemo first to shrink your tumor before surgery. So, I mean, patients are just rushed in, man. They don't know what's happening to them. No idea. And so I am recovering again, still recovering from surgery. But I was thinking, like, I didn't know what I was going to do. Like, everybody wanted me to do chemo. I was afraid not to do chemo. And, but I had enough time to really do more reading and researching and praying and thinking about what I was going to do. And it's kind of like this. I had two paths before me. I had like the wide, paved, brightly lit road that everybody's going down. That's the road that leads to the chemo train. And the chemo train is this beautiful, modern express train, right? And everybody's cheering you on. Like, oh, we support you. We love you. We bake some cookies. Like, we made some t-shirts that say, go Chris, and we're going to run a race for you. Right. And you get on the chemo train, and it's beautiful, and everybody's so nice to you, and the chairs are so comfortable. Right. And they bring you little cookies and treats, and all your needs are met. Everybody loves you and supports you. And then there's the other path where you're just walking into the jungle alone in the dark, right? And there's barely a path, right? There's a few people have been through it, but you got nothing. You got no guides, no support.
Might just be a cow trail. You're not sure yet.
Could have been a badger, maybe a hedgehog. Yeah. And you got nothing, right? And both, and I should have mentioned that, as nice and wonderful and loving and supportive as the conventional treatment chemo train is, once that thing starts, it's very hard to get off, right? And the suffering begins immediately. And you just don't know what's going to happen at the end of the line. Are you going to get off better or worse? Are they going to tell you, we've done all we can do? We're sorry. And then the jungle path, who knows? Am I going to get lost in there and die alone? So both options were scary. And I wished more than anything that some option there was an option that could give me confidence, right? And I didn't have one. Like,
so what ultimately made you decide? And we already know the the ending of this story, which is that you decided not to do chemo. And
the ending of the story is right here in the book. You got to buy my book to find out if I lived or died.
Is that another one of your sales techniques?
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. We got to buy the book. I wonder, did he live or die?
It's out now. Find out.
Cliffhanger.
Right. Find out what happened to Chris.
Yes.
So, when it came time, when the day finally came that I was supposed to go get that port put in, I just woke up that morning and I was like, I'm not going. I'm not doing it. I had been, and by the way, even though I was discouraged and afraid, and confused and struggling mentally, emotionally about what to do, I fired up the juicer, dude. I just was like, I'm doing this. I know I'm definitely doing this. I don't know if I'm doing that, but I'm doing this.
When in doubt, follow Jack LaLanne.
Yeah, exactly. So, I in those weeks, I guess about 3 weeks, I was just raw foods and juicing, man. I was just doing it. And I was feeling so good and so confident. And in the meantime, I had found a naturopathic doctor and I'd found an integrative oncologist who also supported me and had come out of retirement because he didn't like being retired. And in his new season of practice, he was in his 70s. In this new season of his practice, he was actually integrating natural non-toxic therapies that were not FDA approved, but they were non-toxic, right? Because he really was trying to find something that would help his patients. And his main concern was, how can I help their immune system? Again, he'd spent his whole life as an oncologist, so he had seen how ineffective most cancer treatments are, especially when they're caught in later stages. And he just wanted to help people. And so he was doing IV vitamin C and other things. And so I started to assemble a little bit of a team to support me. I had my mom, I had the nutritionist, and an oncologist. That's what I had in the beginning. And so that did help my confidence, right? And then, so when the day came to get the port put in, I was just like, I'm not doing it. I'm not going, right? I can always do chemo, right? I just looked at it sort of like a bit of a last resort. And the idea of radically changing my life, overdosing on nutrition, giving my body more than it's ever had before nutritionally, and changing my whole life, I loved that idea, right? I was excited about it. Like, what will happen if I do this? And I also wasn't just like, let's see what will happen. It was like, I believed it would help me, right? I just believed so deeply that this was good, this was good for me. And when I looked at chemotherapy, I thought, this is bad for me, right? Again, not saying it's bad for everybody. Everybody's going to make their own choice on their treatment. But by the way, you can do both, right? You can overdose on nutrition. You can take care of yourself. You can change your whole life and support your body's ability to heal while you're doing conventional treatment. So it's not either or.
Yeah. And actually, I've seen some research more recently in the last few years showing how certain phytochemicals can actually enhance the effects of chemo, for example. So
curcumin and boswellia are two of them, and black seed oil, Nigella sativa.
Yeah, I think I've seen some on sulforaphane as well.
Yeah, from broccoli, right? So in cruciferous vegetables, which I'll talk about. So anyway, so there I was, right? I'm like, I'm doing this. I'm going in the jungle, and it was really me stepping out in faith, because it's like, okay, God, if you showed this to me, you open this door, like, I'm going through it, and you better see me through, right? You better get me through the jungle, man, because I don't. It's just like me and Jesus. I don't have anybody else really, and so it really forced me to step out in faith, right, in a big way, and step out into the unknown. And really, that's when miracles happen in your life, right? When you step out into the unknown. And so that was scary and exciting. And part of me, I had this sense that, I wasn't planning to be a blogger or, be interviewed by Whitten, right? I was just wanting to survive. But I had this sense that if I could get through this, I could help other people get through.
Mhm.
Right? If I could get through the jungle, like I could show people the way. But again, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to write a book or whatever. It was just like, I just want to survive. I don't care about anything else right now. All I care about is survival. And so I gradually just kept reading and researching. And the cool thing about that time that was different, there was pros and cons about 2004 holistic cancer healing in 2004. I'll start with the cons. The cons is there was very little information. There was nothing on the internet that was helpful, unlike today. No YouTube, no Facebook, right? There's no social media. Like you couldn't find anything. I tried. It was like all the websites were super sketch, and there was no videos online in 2004 really. And so that was frustrating. I couldn't really, it's hard to find other cancer survivors who had healed with nutrition and natural non-toxic therapies. So that was the con. But the pro was that the information I did find all pointed back to the same strategies. So like from book to book to book, they were all saying raw foods, juicing, detoxification, stress, forgiveness, right? Key supplementation, and some advanced therapies like IV vitamin C and things like that, and far infrared saunas. So it was very confirmatory, even though I had a shortage, felt like a shortage of information. It was enough for me. Like it was just enough to keep me on track and to keep my confidence at a level that I was able to maintain what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so nutritionally, I'll tell you exactly what I did. So every morning I juiced I made 64 ounces of juice. So it's about 5 pounds of carrots. I had a Champion juicer, I still do. But it was about 5 pounds of carrots, some beets, celery, ginger root. That was the basic everyday juice formula. And some days it was all carrot juice. I started out with all carrot juice. And then as I started to learn more, I was like, oh, I want to incorporate some more stuff in here, and just amp it up. And then I started adding like greens powder to it, wheatgrass, barley grass, like spirulina, chlorella, like all that good stuff. And just trying to add as much nutrition as I could to the juice. I made a big batch in the morning, 64 ounces, drank it throughout the day. So it's about 8 ounces every hour, 8-ounce servings roughly. The goal with juice is to keep adding nutrition to your body and to your blood, and to keep your blood levels high, right? To keep high levels of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and all these wonderful phytonutrients, phytochemicals from plant food in your blood, right? Just circulating, right? You're dosing every hour. So that's the point of juicing. There were several periods where I did extended juice fasts, 5 days, 10 days. But on the days when I was eating, I would often just juice through breakfast. I might have some fruit mid-morning, a grapefruit or green apple or something if I was feeling a little bit hungry. And then for lunch, I had a giant salad. Not like a salad you get at a restaurant or at McDonald's. This was a giant bowl of vegetables, right? And mainly cruciferous vegetables. So one of my favorite studies on nutrition in cancer is one where they actually dripped the extracts of many different vegetables on cancer cells, on 8 different cancer cell lines. You're probably familiar with this study. And just to see like, hey, if we just juice some vegetables and drip them on cancer cells, will anything happen? And surprisingly, yes, they found that the number one anti-cancer vegetable, which just decimated cancer cells, stopped their growth, killed cancer cells, like super powerful, is garlic. The garlic was like the clear winner against all 8 cell lines. Leeks and onions were basically number 2 and 3 against almost all the cell lines. And then the remaining top 10 anti-cancer vegetables were all the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, even spinach, which isn't cruciferous technically. And so my salad was broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, onions, mushrooms, which are immune boosters, spices, anti-cancer spices, cayenne pepper, turmeric, curry powder, which is a mixture of turmeric and a lot of other stuff, oregano, and I love Bragg sprinkle too, which has 24 different herbs in it, and garlic powder. And then I would top it with apple cider vinegar, which is a great fermented food, sauerkraut, and a little bit of olive oil, and peppers, and sprouted garbanzo beans or lentils or mung beans or all three. And it was just this monstrous, right, salad. And avocado, like, did I say zucchini and squash also? Like, so, dude, I'm just like, just piling it on, right? And that meal, which I call the giant cancer fighting salad, was my staple meal for lunch and dinner every single day, every day with no variety. And I loved it. It was just because as I was thinking through, I was trying to be methodical, and I knew I had to do something that was simple and sustainable, or else I just couldn't keep it up. I even got some raw food cookbooks, and I was like flipping through them. And I remember flipping through and being like, I don't know, it's so many ingredients and like all this prep time. And I need to get a dehydrator to make these raw crackers, and, and I was like, no, I can't do it. Right. I'm just going to eat the same thing every day. Right. And then also looking at raw food recipes, I'm like, well, there's only 5 ingredients in this recipe, and my salad has like 15, or more. So like every time I compared some recipe with the salad, I'm like, my salad is more nutritious than any other recipe, just because of the sheer the variety, right, that was in it. So it just became very clear to me, like juicing and giant salads, this is what I need to do. And then I started incorporating fruit smoothies. Berries are the most potent anti-cancer fruits. So blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, throw a banana in there, throw a fresh coconut, scoop out the meat, put the juice in there, blend it up. And then I've got this amazing, delicious fruit smoothie that I would drink for a snack or have for breakfast. So I just created something that was simple, sustainable, and super potent. And I was just trying to hit every single angle of anti-cancer nutrition to give my body what it could use to heal.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And what's the end of the story? Did you live?
I died and came back to life. So the end of the story is a lot. To summarize, the journey for me was the first 2 years were really difficult, right? Mentally, emotionally, right? Just staying the course, giving my fear to God, and just doing the same thing over and over every day, right? So I got this system in place, and I just worked it, right? I had blood work done every month. I had scans every 6 months for the first couple of years because the oncologist I was working with was very concerned about my immune system, very concerned about the cancer coming back, and we were just keeping a very close eye on things. And it took a couple of years before, we both felt like my blood work, I didn't have any obvious tumor markers, but there were just things in my blood that were weird. My immune system was very low. It seemed like it was, there was immunosuppression going on, a very low white count. Just couldn't figure that out. But after just a few years of just doing it, and just like building a new body, right? Just rebuilding every tissue in my body with whole plant foods, basically. And I will say after 90 days, I started adding cooked food back in because I needed more calories. So I added sweet potatoes and quinoa and some organic brown rice and other cooked veggies like that, just to give me more calories. And my nutritionist at the time recommended, he said, well, you're really underweight. You probably need a little bit of animal protein. Why don't we add a serving of wild caught salmon or maybe some organic lamb a few times a week? And at that time I thought, well, I didn't become a vegan for animal rights. I became a vegan for survival. And so I was just kind of like, well, if you really think it'll help, I just want to live. Like, I don't care about anything else. I just want to live. So if you think this will help me, I'm willing to add a little bit of animal protein back into my diet. So I did. Obviously, it wasn't enough to hurt me. In hindsight, I don't know if it really helped. And I think it might have been a little bit risky at the time. But anyway, after the 2-year mark, I started to feel really good. I mean, just as far as mentally more confident, right? That it wasn't going to come back, because the first 2 years are the most critical. And then I just stayed the course, kept doing it. And then, and then I woke up and it was like almost 5 years, had another scan, totally clean. And then my oncologist at the time, the one I was working with, retired, and I was kind of handed to a new guy. And he said, man, I think you're out of the woods. I think if it hadn't come back now, I don't think it's going to come back. And so that was like celebration time for me. And that's when I started thinking about sharing my story. Right. And
this was what year?
That was so that was around 2009.
Okay.
And I started the blog in 2010.
Nice.
And so that's when I was like, okay, well, I should just at least, because people started asking, word started to get around just locally, and people would ask, like, well, I heard you had cancer and you didn't do chemo. Like, what'd you do? And, I'm like, oh, how much time do you have? And so I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll put it on like a blog or something, and then I can just send people there. And I can be, oh, just go here. I've got it all on this blog, and you can see what I did. And I won't have to tell my story over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah. You see how that turned out.
Yeah.
But what happened, and I didn't realize what was going to happen. I had no idea, but there's so many people out there looking for this information on Google. And as soon as I stepped out and started talking about it and blogging about nutrition and anti-cancer therapies, natural therapies, non-toxic therapies, people just started coming out of the woodwork. Right? They found me, they found my blog, they started following, subscribing to my email newsletter, sending me messages like, can we talk? And I'm coaching people like in my spare time, like trying to help them navigate their healing journeys. And then things just kind of grew and grew. You understand. Mm-hmm. And then after 5 years, it was just, my audience got so big. I was like, wow, this is kind of like my profession now. I can stop doing real estate and just focus on this. And this is all I want to do anyway.
Yeah.
It's help people with this. And so the big pitch, I did write a book, and it's comes out September 25th. So yeah, the book tells my story, which, you guys have kind of heard in the podcast, but it also has a pretty lengthy section on the cancer industry, like the things that really no one knows about the cancer industry and in cancer treatment. So there's a section in there that's sort of critical for anyone who wants to be informed, and either if they have cancer or know someone with cancer, or just want to have that knowledge to carry forward into life about the way the industry works, so you can make smart decisions and navigate it. And then the prescriptive stuff is the third section of the book, where I just kind of break down the daily routine, my diet, lifestyle, like stress reduction habits, like everything I did to change my life, to transform and restore my health is in there. Pretty much.
So if you don't mind, I have a few questions for you. If you have
dude,
another 15 minutes.
Yeah,
or so.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to mention, we talked a bit about kind of doctors, oftentimes well-meaning people, and I'm going to use your perspective on this. So well-meaning people, but kind of tend to often get sort of corrupted by the industry and influenced in negative ways. One thing I'll mention here is there's often a genuine desire to be evidence-based and to follow the evidence. But when it comes to cancer, especially, there's a huge limitation in the evidence, which is that, actually, let me back up at one point. There's often this saying among skeptics, right? That if any type of medicine that was alternative that actually worked, it's now called conventional medicine, right? It's just called medicine.
What do you call alternative medicine that works? Medicine.
Right. Yeah. So, there's this idea that, right, like everything's been tested, and if something's in the domain of alternative medicine, therefore it's by definition, according to that view, it's by definition quackery and pseudoscience.
Yeah.
So one limitation here, especially in cancer, is that there haven't been like randomized controlled trials, let's say, comparing the type of diet that you did, or really any other nutrition and lifestyle intervention, versus, let's say, chemotherapy, or let's say versus radiation for really any particular type of cancer. Like that evidence pretty much doesn't exist. And there are certain ethical concerns around why that type of research hasn't even been done for the most part. But if, let's say, in that environment, in that context where somebody's trying to be evidence-based and that's their commitment and their genuine value system, and they genuinely think being evidence-based is the best strategy to help people, well, if evidence doesn't even exist on nutritional interventions for cancer for the most part, then there's a clear limitation in the advice that a physician can give you on that subject. Add in the fact that, they never, for the most part, 99+% of physicians never even received a single nutrition course in medical school. And you just have some limitations there as far as all of this type of stuff that you're talking about. But do you want to elaborate a bit more on maybe why the types of therapies that you're talking about, natural nutrition and lifestyle therapies, are not kind of within the domain of evidence-based conventional medicine?
Yeah, I love talking about this, actually. So, the skeptics and the critics of people like me like to call what I talk about quackery, but nutrition is the foundation of health, right? Nutrition is not alternative therapy, right? Food is medicine, right? But they'll never call food medicine. And the current medical system as it exists today is one that's controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. So in order for something to be a medicine, it has to be a patented drug, right? So by definition, nutrition is not medicine to them. And so that's sort of point number one. Point number two is there's no money in nutrition. And when you're looking at an industry that is driven by dollars, right? Everybody's got to make a living. I get it, right? Pharmaceutical companies are in business to make as much money as possible for shareholders. They're not funding research studies to test nutritional interventions against cancer. They don't care about nutritional interventions against cancer. If they're funding anything on a natural compound, it's to try to create a synthetic, patentable extract of that compound, like turmeric, for example, that they can develop into a drug, right? So yes, they study plant compounds all the time, but they want to make them into a patentable drug. So the big deception of the term science-based medicine or evidence-based medicine is that it is based on all of the evidence, but it's not. It's only based on science and evidence that lead to patented billion-dollar drugs. Okay, that is how the industry has been built. So, and you're right, you can't do a placebo-controlled, double-blind crossover study with diet, right? You can't tell patients they're eating a carrot when they're not eating a carrot. You know what I mean? So that can't be done. Now, it could be done where, and by the way, I'm working with an MD, and we're in the early process of doing a pilot study on nutritional intervention for cancer.
Nice.
So now you can take patients, radically change their diet and lifestyles, and measure their outcomes. And there's one very famous study where they did this. There's a couple actually, but Dr. Dean Ornish took early stage prostate cancer patients that had no treatment and put them on a diet and lifestyle intervention. They put them on a plant-based diet and added exercise and stress reduction classes every week. And what they found was every patient who followed this program had reversal in their PSA, reversal of prostate cancer from following a plant-based diet, exercise, and stress reduction. So that study is amazing. Then there was a follow-up study where they did it with late-stage prostate cancer patients, and they found the same thing. The patients that followed this advice, right, that followed the program closely, because compliance is an issue when you have diet and lifestyle intervention, right? People have to stop eating Twinkies. Like some people don't do it. They they eat a little healthy and then they eat more cheeseburgers. But the patients that complied had reversal in their PSA numbers. So that's an amazing one. That one happened. Anybody can Google Ornish prostate cancer and the study will pop right up and you can read it. It's fantastic.
Mhm.
But the only reason he got permission to do that was because it was early stage prostate cancer, and it's slow growing, and so they felt like it wasn't unethical. So because the pharmaceutical industry has infiltrated every aspect of medicine, they have written the rules. And so one of the rules is it's unethical to treat a person with nutrition if there's already an approved treatment called chemo.
Right. This
Right.
standard of care is
So,
established as this, and that's what's viewed as evidence-based. Then to
right.
subject people to anything like in lieu of that is, kind of in the domain of alternative medicine as a substitute for the standard of care becomes unethical by definition.
Yeah. Yeah. And the crazy thing, I don't like the term alternative medicine or alternative therapies because it can mean anything, right? You drinking your own urine, okay? Eating tree bark, living off bugs, like anything is alternative, right? So I shy away from that term because it really does. Some of it is total quackery,
Yeah.
right? There are people in my space in the holistic health and wellness world that, unfortunately, to my dismay, tend to have the idea that everything alternative is somehow good.
Oh, thank you
Right.
for mentioning this. Drives me crazy.
Yeah, and better than conventional or whatever.
Yes.
And I am not one of those people, right? I'm very cautious. I love evidence. And let's talk about evidence too. So here's the evidence we do have. We have hundreds of thousands of nutritional science studies, right? Published, peer-reviewed, evidence-based studies on nutrition. And a large chunk of those are on the anti-cancer compounds in fruits and vegetables, right? In food. And the cancer promoters in certain foods like meat and dairy, and the anti-cancer compounds in other foods like cruciferous vegetables and berries, okay? So we have all this amazing nutritional science evidence that people who are critics of what I talk about somehow try to convince their audiences that that's quackery, right? That nutritional science is somehow quackery, but they never quite call nutritional science quackery, but they call me a quack, right? So we have all that, which I get really excited about, because in the beginning, I didn't have access to any of these studies. Like, I've only found them once I started blogging and started like, wait a minute. Okay, I did these things. I got well. I've met a bunch of other people who also did these things and also healed other types and stages of cancer. There's got to be something to it. What evidence exists? So then I started on the quest, like you, like, okay, what do we have? And as I started to research, I found all this amazing stuff, right? Like, oh, it explains it. Berries, ellagic acid, garlic, allicin, right? Broccoli and cruciferous vegetables have sulforaphane and isothiocyanates, indole-3 carbinol. So, like my brain is exploding, right? Like learning all this wonderful stuff, and I'm connecting all these dots, right? Oh, obesity contributes to cancer because it raises estrogen, promotes inflammation, right? Secretes a hormone called FGF2, which can convert healthy cells into cancerous cells, especially from belly fat. So like, rah, right? So learning all this stuff and like, wow, there's all this evidence. Nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, there's also another huge layer of evidence, which is around prevention and the relationship of that with nutritional science. We have lots and lots of long-term epidemiological studies, and granted, you can't necessarily draw causation from this, but what we know, of course, if you connect the dots, and it's really not hard to connect the dots, all the pieces of the puzzle are there. We know that healthier lifestyle factors, including certain nutrition habits, dramatically reduces your risk of dozens of different types of cancer. And we also know, as you mentioned, now kind of on a smaller, more mechanistic level, we have research showing that specific nutrients, like from specific phytochemicals in specific plants, whether garlic or cruciferous vegetables, et cetera, act on specific mechanisms to help either limit cancer cell growth or cause apoptosis, program cell death of cancers, and so on. So, that evidence exists, but, and even skeptics, I think, don't necessarily deny that. Even, a lot of it is just ignorance in a lot of cases, that they just are unaware that all of that science exists, and they think talking about nutrition in relationship to cancer is nonsense. But even those who, I think, recognize that evidence exists, there's still kind of this hard line that they're unwilling to cross between prevention and treatment. And yeah, okay, maybe all that stuff is helpful and wonderfully effective in prevention of cancer, but to talk about it in the context of treating or curing cancer then becomes quackery and pseudoscience.
Yeah, well, and there's the third layer of evidence, okay? So we've got the broad population studies, epidemiological, which aren't perfect, but hey, when you got hundreds of thousands, millions of people with much lower rates of cancer than the US, right? When there's dozens of nations with rates of cancer that are half as much as the US, a third, right? The rate of colon cancer in rural Africa is 50 times lower, Like when you look at these studies, like, hello, like Occam's razor, let's see what they're doing. How is it different? Probably is the way their diet and lifestyles probably are the reason, right? And we know in some cases the diet and lifestyle is definitely the reason. So you've got that level. Then you've got, like you said, the sort of biological level, all the nutritional science studies on anti-cancer compounds in food. But then the third layer is all the anecdotal evidence, which people hate anecdotal evidence, right? They hate it. They can't stand it. They can't stand the fact that people are healing cancer. They're sharing their stories, right? But I love anecdotal evidence. I mean, we learn from the experience of others. And every major scientific discovery pretty much started with an anecdote. But the problem is we don't have clinical trial evidence, right? That's the one thing missing. We've got three of the four major evidence pieces, right? And hopefully in our lifetime, some benevolent billionaires will fund some really well-designed diet and lifestyle intervention trials, more of them, right? The Ornish studies are amazing, are just amazing clues and indications that, hey, this is legit, this works, your body can heal. And what I say often is, look, the body creates cancer. The body can heal it if given the proper nutrients and care. Right? So it does take, it's not about a magic bullet. It's not about a miracle cure. It's not about an alternative cure, right? It's about radical diet and lifestyle transformation, massive action. This is what I encourage people to do. Take massive action. It's not this lotion or potion or herb or supplement or weird concoction, right? You've got to change your whole life. You've got to eliminate everything in your life that may be contributing to your disease and replace those things with evidence-based diet and lifestyle strategies that can only help you. And that's the great thing about the holistic health world, at least my little corner of it, is that I'm only interested in promoting things with great enthusiasm that can only help.
Yeah.
Right? That can only help. I'm not encouraging people to do risky, wacky, IV therapies or whatever, right? Like snake venom or something.
Yeah. So a couple specific questions I have for you, a couple areas that are controversial. One is, some people might listen to you talking and say, hey, this guy's advising me to avoid, conventional medicine to treat my cancer. Avoid chemo, avoid radiation, as just a blanket rule. I want to inject, first of all, the fact that you've already mentioned a couple times, you've said, hey, these are my decisions. These are not necessarily right for everyone. But I'll add to this that every type of cancer and the treatments that are available are often radically different from one type of cancer to the next, as far as the actual evidence on conventional treatments like chemo for that specific type of cancer. And in some cases, the evidence is very poor that chemo is effective in that helping that particular type of cancer. And in some cases, it's quite good. So, there's a lot of degrees of nuance there around the specific types of cancer and the specific treatments that are available. my first question is, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. And then my second question is, you've also said, I think, some controversial stuff around kind of veganism and meat and dairy and things like that, that I know some people would disagree with. And there are even some people now promoting the keto diet, which has become very popular for weight loss. A lot of people are promoting that, sort of the metabolic theory of cancer. Cancer feeds on carbs and sugars, and so by starving it of carbs and sugars and eating a keto diet, high fat, and that's very much inclusive of animal proteins, which you're saying are bad for cancer. People are saying that can be very effective for cancer. So I'll just present those two things, and I'll let you take it where you want to take it.
Yes, this is good. Good questions. Good questions, Ari. So yeah, first of all, I have been accused by let's just say, call them opponents, okay, my intellectual or theoretical opponents, of telling people not to do treatment, okay, which I don't do. I don't tell people not to do treatment. I do highlight, like I said earlier, the perils and pitfalls of treatment. And I created a guide called 20 Questions for Your Oncologist. So a patient can ask the right questions and figure out if treatment makes sense for them. Because like you said, there's a lot of different types of cancer. Some cancers respond very well to treatment, and some don't really respond at all. So a couple of easy examples are childhood leukemia has a very high cure rate. 10-year survival is over 90%. Testicular cancer, it's about the same. And even lymphomas, highly responsive to chemotherapy, very high 10-year survival. Okay. Now, the most solid tumor cancers, though, do not respond well. And respond's a weird word. It's an industry word, right? Respond just means, oh, did it shrink a little? Oh, it responded, right? But we're talking about survival. The most important statistic that everyone should know surrounding cancer and the cancer industry and the progress they've made is that in the last 60 years, the death rate, which is the purest measure of winning or losing the war on cancer, the death rate has only improved by 5% since the introduction of chemotherapy in the 1950s. 5% reduction in the overall death rate from cancer. Now, again, for a small percentage of cancers, they've really made huge progress. And it's basically leukemia, it's blood-based cancers, leukemia, lymphomas, and then testicular. And like some really rare ones, like Burkitt's lymphoma is another lymphoma. But the solid tumor, breast, brain, colon, lung, liver, ovarian, cervical, pancreatic, are major cancer killers. They've made very little progress, if any, in some cases, zero progress in improving the death rate in the last 60 years. So that's a pretty powerful indictment against the cancer industry's progress, despite the hundreds of billions spent on research. Okay, so there's that. But again, every person needs to be informed. Like, if you get my guide, download my free guide, if you ask those questions, then you will get answers. Is the treatment you're being given palliative or curative, right? Is the treatment, what is the success rate of that drug therapy for your cancer type and stage, sex and age group, right? Most patients aren't asking those kind of questions. How about, hey, can I speak with 3 to 5 people who are long-term survivors with my type of cancer that you've treated, right? Great question to ask your doctor. Like, do you have some successes I could meet and talk to that did this drug therapy and had my kind of cancer and are still alive and thriving 5-10 years out? So again, I have sort of a 2-pronged mission. One is to help patients make an informed decision with all the evidence, right, and facts about their cancer and treatment, right, not get rushed in out of fear. So that's sort of like, that's one prong. And then the other prong is to empower them with knowledge and information that they can use to transform their health, that they can help themselves, like with evidence-based nutrition, lifestyle medicine, and that will only help them, even if they do all the treatments the doctors want them to do. So, that's the way I look at it. That's the way I approach it. And it's totally fair to say that, yeah, some cancers respond better than others, but again, you can pretty much boil it down to, is this an epithelial cancer or a non-epithelial cancer? Solid tumor cancers don't have a great success rate. Blood-based cancers have a much better success rate. Then there's the famous 2% study. So the 2% study came out the year after I was diagnosed, where they at University of Sydney, I believe, anyway, it came out of Australia, but they looked at 22 different types of cancer. And the study is called The Contribution of Cytotoxic Chemotherapy to 5-Year Survival in Adult Malignancies. And what they found is that of the 22 cancers they looked at, chemotherapy only contributed 2.1% to 5-year survival. Right now, again, it's an average, so some of them contribute 0, right? And then some of them contributed better, like up to 30% for one of the lymphomas in the study. So people like to throw that 2% number around, but they usually misquote it and say like chemotherapy only works 2% of the time. But that's not what the study found. It found that it only contributed 2% to 5-year survival, which still isn't good, right? It was a groundbreaker industry shocker, but nothing changed, right? And that was 12 years ago. Treatments haven't really gotten any better. And, it's not like the industry was like, oops, well, we should stop doing that now because they didn't. Since I'm on those lines, immunotherapy, people, it's on everybody's mind. What about immunotherapy? Immunotherapy is a great idea. It's a great idea to improve the immune system, right? To try to empower the body's innate ability to heal itself, right? But the problem with immunotherapy is there's several problems. One, only 8% of cancer patients right now can have any benefit from it. And that's just for a certain few number of cancers. So a very low number of patients can have any benefit. Now, benefit doesn't mean cure. It just means, it shrunk the tumor temporarily or whatever, right? So a very small percentage of patients for a small percentage of cancers have experienced some benefit in clinical trials. That's problem number one. It's been overhyped. Problem number two is it's insanely expensive. Like some of these immunotherapy drugs are $1 million a year, right? It's like, what? Like, this is absolute insanity. So that could improve over time. They could come up with some perfect immunotherapy drug tomorrow and whatever. That's great. I hope they do. And believe me, the minute the industry comes out with a treatment or drug that cures cancer, I'll be like, great, go do that. Just go do that, right? Go do that. Great. If it works, do it. But the myth is that there's going to be some kind of, if you donate enough money to cancer research, we'll find a cure, right? But there's hundreds of types of cancer. They're all different. There will never be one cure. All they're really doing is just trying to incrementally create drugs that work a little bit better than the current drug. And if they work a little bit better than the current drug, they can make billions of dollars. Like you just have to work a little bit better and then you totally replace the existing drug. So that's what cancer drug development's all about. I mean, sure, they'd love to find something that cured cancer. I mean, yes, but the reality is they don't have to cure it. They just have to improve a little bit to make billions. So, yeah, does that answer the question?
It does, yes. The next question is just keto. So
Yep.
Keto is becoming quite popular. It obviously it's a huge trend now as far as a weight loss diet, but it's also popular in certain integrative and holistic anti-cancer circles. So what's your take on keto, which obviously, a lot of those people would have significant differences of opinion with someone like you who's coming more from a vegan perspective and plant-based and avoiding a lot of the animal foods. They're saying, no, avoid carbs, high fat, moderate protein, and we can be totally inclusive of animal proteins because we don't think that those are harmful.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll answer in two parts. One, I'll talk about animal protein, then I'll talk about keto specifically. There's a number of ways that animal protein fuels cancer growth. The first is hormones. So when you eat animal protein, you raise IGF-1, which is insulin-like growth factor in your body. And insulin-like growth factor is, IGF-1, is cancer rocket fuel. It tells cancer cells to grow. So if you eat anything from an animal, right, dairy, meat, fish, eggs, you are sending growth signals to cancer cells via all these hormones that exist in animal food. Doesn't matter if it's pasture raised or farm raised, obviously, or factory farm raised, they all have hormones, whether they're added extra hormones in the feed or shots, or if they just never have a hormone injected ever, right? It's a living being, it's full of hormones. So hormones in animal food fuel cancer growth. Methionine, which is an amino acid that's very, very high in meat, and it's very, very low in vegetables and almost non-existent in fruit. And methionine is an amino acid that many cancer cells are dependent on to survive. So you actually starve certain types of cancer cells by eating a diet that's naturally very low or restricted in methionine. The third way is saturated fat. So cancer cells like saturated fat for fuel, and saturated fat, there's multiple studies on saturated fat from animal foods fueling cancer growth. The fourth way is when you cook meat, you create heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are cancer causers in meat when animal flesh or animal fat are cooked at high temperatures. Bacon is an example that most people don't know, but processed meat, bacon, sausage, jerky, hot dogs, lunch meats, processed meats are a group 1 carcinogen. That's the highest level of evidence of any substance on earth in terms of the confidence that it causes cancer. So cigarettes, right? Arsenic and bacon are all group 1 carcinogens, right? They cause cancer. Red meat is a group 2, which means it has a lot of evidence, not as much as group 1. So there's a number of reasons why animal food fuels cancer growth. And and again, I don't come at it actually from a vegan perspective because I'm not a vegan. I eat a plant-based diet, but I do eat a little bit of animal food a few times a month. I might have some fish or I might have some eggs or something. But my diet's about 98 to 99% plant-based because in my quest for, my personal health journey went from healing cancer, right, to once I was confident that I was healed, I went down a lot of dietary rabbit trails, paleo, Weston Price. Like I went down all these holes and experimented with a lot of different diets because I was curious. I was really interested in longevity, right? It's like, okay, I'm cancer-free now. I'm alive. I'm healthy. How do I need to eat and live long-term? Because being a raw foodist is it's not a healthy diet long-term, right? It's an amazing healing diet short-term for detoxification and all that. But long-term, it's not, there's no evidence. There's no healthy, long-living populations in the world that are raw foodists or that are vegan. But there are very healthy, long-living populations, the longest living, that eat a diet that's about 95% plant-based, which we know from the blue zones, for example. So it's kind of a long way of me saying, like, my diet now is one that is really just geared toward longevity, which means eating tons of plant food, tons of fruits and vegetables every day. When I was healing cancer, I was eating 15 to 20 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. And now I eat like 10 to 15 servings because I don't juice all day like I did then. But having said that, right, small amounts of animal food, it's okay. I'm not a vegan. Don't see a huge threat there. There may be some benefit, or maybe it isn't enough to hurt you if it's less than 5% of calories. But for healing cancer, I think it's risky and it should be cut way back to 0 or maybe a few times a month tops.
Mm-hmm.
So the keto, and by the way, so there's all of that. I've said all that. And then I've interviewed, we're approaching 70 people now that I've interviewed on my site. And there's more coming at me like every week who have healed cancer with nutrition and natural therapies. And all types and all stages of cancer. And some of them healed without doing any conventional treatment. Some of them healed after conventional treatment failed. Those are the two types of people I like to interview because those stories are the most compelling, right? If they did all the chemo and all that, and they also did juicing and whatever, it's like, okay, that's great. Glad you're alive. But, the cancer industry would look at you and say, oh, well, the chemo cured you, right? So anyway, I gravitate towards the people that have these just amazing, remarkable healing and cancer reversal stories. And I've interviewed a ton of them. And guess what? They all did raw foods, juicing, radical life change. Like they all basically did the same stuff as me. So this is a transition into the keto conversation. So in 2012, I start seeing articles and little stuff online popping up about the ketogenic diet for cancer. So I'm like, what's this about? And went down that rabbit hole. I understand on the surface, it's very compelling theory, hypothesis, really, that cancer cells run on glucose. And if you deprive the body of glucose, you're starving cancer cells. And, they can't use ketones for fuel. And so you starve cancer. It's the best anti-cancer diet. And it's so sciencey. And, Thomas Seyfried wrote this textbook about it. Right. And so I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. I'm really interested in this. And so I started talking about it a little bit, about my interest in it, and had an interview with someone about it on the website, on my blog or whatever. And then, but I had this funny feeling about it. Like there's something in my gut that was like, I had this uneasiness about it and I couldn't shake it. I was like, I don't know, something is weird about this. And then, so I just kept paying more and more attention. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, there's all these people saying how great it is. Where are the survivors? Where are they? Where are the people who did reverse their cancer with this diet? And I realized there's a couple, right? It's like I can count on one hand. And one of the big proponents, there was a chiropractor a few years ago who was, really trying to convince everybody. He had brain cancer, ketogenic diet, was just telling everybody how great it was. And then he died. And I'm like, okay. And then somebody else I knew who was the big ketogenic diet promoter and was a breast cancer survivor, her cancer came back. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. There's more to this than meets the eye. So then I started really going down the rabbit hole. I talked to a friend of mine who runs a Gerson clinic in Mexico. He was like, it doesn't work. Don't do it. Like, don't tell anyone to do it. It doesn't work. And then Dr. Nick Gonzalez, the late Dr. Nick Gonzalez, wrote an amazing article, really just kind of dismantling it. A huge, just lengthy piece about the history of alternative cancer treatments, about the ketogenic diet, about how Atkins, actually most people don't know that Dr. Atkins had a wing in his clinic where he was treating cancer patients with the ketogenic diet, and it was a colossal failure. And so this article like rocked my world pretty hard. And then I started really digging into the actual published studies on the ketogenic diet. And like, okay, well, what are these studies? What studies are out there? Okay, like what are they actually finding or proving or whatever? And that's when it actually got, for lack of a better word, comical. Okay, so like there's one study where there are several rat studies where they find that the rats live longer on a ketogenic diet. But what they did was they implanted human glioma, human brain cancer, into a rat's body, which would never happen, okay? Brain cancer doesn't metastasize into the body. But anyway, they put human brain cancer into a rat, and they put these rats on a ketogenic diet. Again, humans aren't rats either. And the rats lived, 55 days longer on a ketogenic diet plus hyperbaric oxygen therapy than the rats that weren't on it. Okay. So, okay, they live longer, but they're rats and it's an unrealistic scenario, right? There's another rat study where they live longer on a supplement called Keto Cal, and they lived like 5 days longer, than the rats that, the rats that were given Keto Cal and treated with radiation. They achieved remission I don't know how long the remission was. They achieved remission. The rats treated with just the ketogenic diet only lived 5 days longer than the control rats. And then there's a pilot study on humans where there were 16 patients were treated ketogenic diet, all died. Then there's another study I found, 2012 study that found that tumors can use ketones for fuel.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing, and I'll mention real quick. I'm actually about to interview 2 cancer researchers. One is actually a proponent of ketogenic diets and has written a book. Her name is Nasha Winters. And then the other one is actually highly critical of ketogenic diets in the context of cancers, and talks much like you're talking now about how much the science on it has been misrepresented, and how certain types of cancer can even feed preferentially on ketones over glucose.
Yeah, and I can even tell you which study. There's a study that came out in 2017 last year that there is there's a certain genetic mutation in some types of cancer that actually that allows them to grow faster with ketones. So basically 50% of melanomas will grow faster if you are on a ketogenic diet. 10% of colon cancers, 100% of hairy cell leukemia cancers grow faster on ketones, and about 5% of multiple myelomas. And then, there's a couple other studies. Again, like there's one, there's several other patient studies where it's like, they give them a ketogenic diet and they do a little bit better for a little while, but no one's cured, right? Even there's a 2018 study on mice where they found that when they combined P13K inhibiting drugs with ketogenic diet, it worked better than just the drug. But the mice that they just gave the ketogenic diet, they had accelerated cancer growth of acute myeloid leukemia. So anyway, yeah, there's all these studies that really don't. The evidence is so weak. Even the published. I mean, the weirdest thing about it is that there's all these people running around saying how great this diet is for cancer, and yet when you look at the published studies, it's terrible. It's like just not really proving anything. Mice live a little longer than die. Humans maybe live a few months longer and then die. Or it works better if you combine it with radiation than not. Okay, well, that's something. But at the end of the day, in the absence of good clinical trials on humans, you've got to just compare the anecdotal evidence. Yeah. And if that's all we have to look at, the anecdotal evidence is huge. I mean, we have decades and decades and decades of survivor stories. And one of the funnest things I do is finding these people and interviewing them, of people who've healed, and they're all doing the same thing. There's not a restriction on carbohydrates. They're eating tons of fruits and vegetables. Most of them are juicing and, changing their whole lives and all that. And, it's just like, why are we ignoring what's really working, and it doesn't mean it works for everybody. I can't promise everybody a cure or whatever, but why would we ignore that in favor of a fad diet that has almost no evidence, anecdotal or otherwise, and is completely unhealthy, unnatural, and unsustainable? And there's no population in the world that eats a ketogenic diet. There's no ancestral population that eats that way. There are no hunter-gatherers that eat that way. Even the Inuits and the Eskimos who eat a lot of fat are not in ketosis. And so, it's just, unfortunately, it's consumed the culture. It's just the biggest fad. I mean, it's just like Atkins, right? Atkins was everywhere. And, there were whole grocery store sections devoted, if you remember, there were entire aisles of Atkins products, Atkins friendly, like the Atkins label was on like everything back in the, I guess, 90s or whatever. And it's just, history repeats itself. And so now it's just every time I turn around, something is keto this, keto that, and the fad will pass, I think. I'm ready for it to pass so we can, get back to the stuff that's really helping people.
So I want to be sensitive of your time here. We've gone way over. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Of course.
I would love it if you could just wrap up with your top 3 real quick tips that people should be aware of if they are looking to either prevent or treat cancer.
Yep, absolutely. Really, there's 3 pillars of health: diet and lifestyle, environment, and stress. Okay. So your diet and lifestyle are huge contributors. I believe the 2 best things any person can do for themselves, dietarily and lifestyle, is 1, eat a plant-based diet. Don't have to be a pure vegan, but eat tons of fruits and vegetables, and limit your processed food and animal products to less than 5% of your diet, really 1 to 2%. That's where I'm at. The lifestyle stuff is, alcohol and tobacco, promote cancer. So if you smoke, you should probably stop. If you're taking pharmaceuticals, you should work with your doctor to get off them. The beautiful thing about a plant-based diet is you can reverse a lot of chronic health conditions with a plant-based diet, especially if you're overweight, because when you lose weight, you can reverse type 2 diabetes, you can reverse arthritis, autoimmune disease, inflammatory diseases, all kinds of stuff, just by getting back to a normal, healthy weight. So, and then, abusing pharmaceuticals or taking pharmaceuticals can increase your risk of cancer, and alcohol abuse increases. I mean, now the latest is even 1 drink a day increases your cancer risk. So you want to be very cautious about that. So that's the diet component. And the other piece of the lifestyle thing is exercise. Like, you've got to move. Like, being sedentary increases your risk of cancer. It increases your risk of obesity. And obesity increases your risk of cancer. So, like, making at the minimum walking 30 minutes a day. Just make that a minimum. Like, this is a non-negotiable thing, way that you take care of yourself every day. It's just going for a walk 30 minutes every day, or twice a day for 15 minutes, 3 times a day for 10 minutes, like just 30 minutes of brisk walking. Of course, you can do more. I love to go to the gym. I love CrossFit kind of stuff and all that. But running, hiking, rock climbing, jujitsu, yoga, like anything you do to move your body, to sweat, to get huffing and puffing, get your heart pumping, hopefully get in the fresh air and sunshine as well, is just amazing for you. It's so good. So that's the physical component. And then diet and lifestyle. The second thing is environment. And so we have to be aware that there are environmental pollutants that cause cancer, right? So where you live really matters. If you live around a lot of pollution, industrial area, or in a big city, then you will have an elevated cancer risk. I do believe you need to get a really good filtration system for your water. You need to filter your shower water, and you need an air filter, a really good air purifier in your home, because indoor air is 5 times, 6 times more polluted than outdoor air because of all the off-gassing from furniture and stuff like that. So you got to be aware of environmental factors and do your best to clean up your environment, remove toxic stuff from your home, get rid of air fresheners and candles and toxic cleaning products and all that kind of stuff. Even clean up your body care products. I mean, it's a big process, right? To sort of clean up your life, but I think it's necessary if you're serious about healing and prevention. All of this stuff I talk about in my shamelessly promoted new book, Chris Beat Cancer, A Comprehensive Plan for Healing Naturally. And then the third thing is stress. And stress is like the secret killer, right? The silent killer. And it really is the underlying cause of most disease. You can trace back to stress, because stress leads people to destructive behavior. When you have resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness, jealousy, anger, prejudice, like negativity, when you're critical, judgmental, insecure, when you're carrying around guilt and shame, all of those negative emotions produce stress in your mind, in your heart, in your body, and lead to an unhealthy physical state. One, stress elevates stress hormones, which increase inflammation and suppress your immune system. And 2, stress leads us to medicate, right? And so many of us engage in unhealthy behaviors to medicate ourselves. And we self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, with cigarettes, tobacco, and with food, even with promiscuous sex, with workaholism, with excessive binge watching media, entertainment. And so, but the root cause of all that is stress. right? Most people are overweight or obese because they overeat, and most people overeat because it's a coping mechanism, right? They use food as medication when food really should be used as medicine, right? It's a big difference. And so addressing that, and again, that is also a big component in my book, is identifying and eliminating the sources of stress in your life. Because I really, truly believe that, and I've seen this experientially, that if you don't address stress in your life, you can do everything else right and still not get well, right? And it can outweigh everything else.
Yeah.
And so your spirit, mind, body, right? They're all connected. And if you're spiritually, mentally, emotionally sick, eventually you will be physically sick as well. So that's a big thing. And forgiveness, I cannot overstate how powerful forgiveness is. It is just one of the best things you can do for yourself, is to forgive the people who've hurt you in life. Is when you forgive them and you let it go, give it to God, and just say, hey, they're all yours. Like, you can deal with them. I'm letting it go. And you just release that burden, man. And it's so freeing. It's so healing. And it's just an amazing thing you can do. And you're not doing it for them. You're not, letting them off the hook. They're going to get what they deserve eventually, right? You're just deciding it's not going to be for me, right? Like, I'm not responsible for the payback. They're going to get it, right? We all understand karma. We all understand you reap what you sow. What goes around comes around, right? People that hurt you in life will get what's coming to them, but you just let them go and give it to God and let him deal with them. It's powerful stuff, man. I'm telling you. If a person can only do one thing from this whole interview, there's only one takeaway from the whole thing. It's forgive it. Forgive everyone who has ever hurt you. Just do that.
Yeah, well said, man. And I think that's a great way to end. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking almost 2 hours out of your day to do this. I really appreciate all the
only for you, Ari.
It better be only for me. No, seriously, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and very excited to get this out to my audience and share your new book. So people can get that on Amazon.com, and it's Chris Beat Cancer.
That's the book right there, man. And again, thank you for taking the time to let me share my story and talk about my passion and just share it with your audience. It really means a lot.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks so much. And everyone, make sure to go grab his new book on Amazon, and I'll talk to you again next week. Awesome, man. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.